Starting off a video yawning. Anyway, this ain't going to be boring. It's about Paladins. And Paladins have gone through so many changes in Wrath of the Lich King. Literally so many that I'm bound to miss a couple. So I'm not going to say this is an exhaustive list of changes, but it's definitely all the changes that you need to know about. So I've already looked at the Feral, DPS, Balance, Resto. So we've covered Druid off completely. We're now going to go through the Paladin specs this week, and next week we're going to go through Priest and hopefully Mage. Hopefully I can get both done in a week, because there is a little bit less to talk about with those two, if I'm honest. But every spec of Paladin, there's a lot to talk about. And we're going to start with the one which I think is going to take the longest, which is Protection. So the Prot Paladin has gone through huge amounts of changes, and it will be the most sought after tank, especially early on in Wrath. Now, we know there was an influx of Prot Paladins in TBC, but not quite to the extent that I think we're going to see in Wrath. To put it in perspective, I have not grouped yet in 2 weeks of smashing several characters, doing several raids, as in several Nax runs, VOAs, loads and loads of heroics. I've not grouped with a Protection warrior yet. Literally, I have not seen a Prot warrior on this Wrath server that I'm playing on, which is a bit weird, but everybody rolls Paladin, even DKs. Everyone remembers DKs being really strong, and they are strong, don't get me wrong, on single target. Paladins are just strong all round, single target, multi-target, and it's because they've gone through so many changes. So what we're going to do today, we're going to have a look at the talents, what's changed in the talents, which we will gloss over things that are either the same or very similar. But then we're going to look at all the new spells and abilities you get, new glyphs. Obviously the glyph system as in inscription is implemented in Wrath of the Lich King, and there's a lot of glyphs that play very, very big parts to Paladins' survivability and even their ability to taunt. So there's tons to cover. So before we start covering it, please do make sure you drop a like on the video, because I promise you, by the end of this video, if you don't like it, then you're not a Paladin. If you're a Paladin, there's no reason you won't like this video, because it's going to tell you everything, more or less, that you need to know to get ready for Wrath of the Lich King Classic. And obviously, make sure you subscribe to the channel for tons and tons more Wrath content, TBC content, when there's anything worth talking about when it comes to TBC, which at the moment, there's nothing that I haven't covered already on the channel somewhere to do with TBC that needs covering, basically, or that somebody else hasn't done a really fantastic job of. But Wrath of the Lich King Protection Paladin. Let's go. So first of all, in case you don't know, the talent trees grow in Wrath of the Lich King much like they did in TBC. So where they ordinarily go down to Avenger's Shield, now we're now going all the way down to Hammer of Righteous, and we're going to talk about all of these talents and what they bring and what they've changed. Let's kick off first by looking at the new abilities, because some of the talents play a part towards new abilities by increasing new abilities' effectiveness. So let's look at what new things you get as a Paladin, and we're only going to focus on things that are relevant for a Prot Paladin. We're not going to talk about things about Rep Paladin. That will come in the Rep video. Holy will come in the Holy video. But to be fair, pretty much every ability we get, even if it's for Rep, it's for Holy, it's still probably got some use for Protection, so odds are we'll talk about it anyway. So first up, the biggest one probably for Prot Paladin is Divine Plea. Now you gain 25% of your total mana over 15 seconds, but the amount healed by your Flash of Light, Holy Light and Holy Shock spells is reduced by 50%. Now looking at this straight away, you probably think that it's a holy talent, which it is. It's even in the holy section of your spellbook. The fact that you can use this as a holy paladin, but it gimps your healing for that duration, so you want to use it in downtime or phase changes, anything like that, that's, you know, when you would be using Divine Plea. Whereas with a Protection Paladin, you actually want to keep it up 100% of the time. And I know you're looking at it thinking, well, it only lasts 15 seconds with a minute cooldown. How can I keep it up 100% of the time? We'll get into that when we look at the talents. The next big one, again, as a holy talent, but something you're going to use a lot as Prot, is Sacred Shield. So each time the target takes damage, they gain a Sacred Shield, absorbing 600 damage and increasing the Paladin's chance to critically hit with Flash of Light by 50% for up to 12 seconds. They cannot gain this effect more than every 6 seconds, and it lasts 1 minute. It doesn't, it actually lasts 30 seconds, but there is a talent that increases the effectiveness of this, which again, we'll get into in a minute. In the protection tree, we will talk about blessing changes, and some of them that have changed from blessings to hands, but that will make sense soon. And we won't cover Divine Sacrifice just yet, because that actually comes from a talent, as does Hammer of Righteousness. But we've now got Hand of Reckoning, which is a single target taunt. So taunts the target to attack you. If the target is tauntable and not currently targeting you, it causes 1073 holy damage. So it's nice that not only are you taunting the target, you're also going to do a big chunk of threat on that target at the same time, because it does that damage, that holy damage, which, as we know, as a Protection Paladin, you gain a lot more threat generation because of Righteous Fury when it comes to holy damage. So that's brilliant. And no longer have you only got an AoE taunt. You've still got your AoE taunt, you've still got Righteous Defense, but now you've got a single target as well, which is massive. The next big one, definitely Shield of Righteousness. So this is a nice big single target hit that's going to cause a lot of threat. It's on a 6-second cooldown and it slams the target with your shield, causing holy damage based on your block value plus an additional 520. So the higher block value you've got, the more damage this is going to do, which ultimately means more threat. And then when it comes to the ret side of stuff, so like judgments, seals, and I say ret side of stuff because obviously you are going to use seals and you're going to judge as a protection paladin, but they fall under the retribution sort of part of the spellbook, you know. So they've changed drastically as well, and we'll talk about all the changes to hands and blessings and what the difference is. We'll talk about judgments and seals and how that works, and we'll also touch on auras a little bit as well, but let's get through the talents first. Now we'll try and get through these fairly quick. When we look at the protection tree, it looks like it's gone through more changes than it actually has, but if we do a direct comparison side by side, you'll notice you can still see a lot of the same icons, but not necessarily in the same positions. And there is reasons for this, which does make sense, such as the addition of Divine Sacrifice and Divine Guardian, and the fact that Redoubt has moved quite far down the tree in comparison to where it ordinarily is in TBC. That again does make sense. And because shield specialization has gone, it's not actually gone, but it has freed up some talent points up here for things to be shuffled around. So before you had shield specialization, which increases the amount of damage absorbed by your shield by 10%, and now part of Redoubt built into it is increasing your block value by 30%, which, remember, block value plays a big part in the damage of your Shield of Righteousness as well. So this is not only a defensive talent, it actually offensively increases the damage of your Shield of Righteousness. But working our way down, you'll notice Divine Strength has moved. So Divine Strength used to be in the Holy tree at the top, where you had the Strength and the Intellect Talents. So the Intellect Talents are still there in Holy, but it's one tier further down, but we're not talking about Holy. But you've got now Divine Strength, which with 5 points can increase your strength by 15%. And you've got Divinity, which increases all healing done by you and all healing effects on you by 5% with 5 points in it. Like I say, I'm going to gloss over things that have either changed minorly or not at all. Even the duration of all stun effects being reduced, but for example, has changed not only position, but also it gives slightly more stun effect reduction as well. But it's not drastic enough to really talk about it when we've got so much to get through. So glossing over these ones that have not changed much, we've got Anticipation, which is worth mentioning because Anticipation now gives 5% dodge, whereas it used to give 4 defense skill per point with a total of 20 defense. So now it's flat out dodge, but that's still nice and it's still worth taking. Improved Righteous Fury still gives damage reduction. It doesn't need to give bonus threat because it already gives 80% threat generated, and trust me, you're not going to have threat issues. Blessing of Sanctuary has changed. I was going to leave this till we talk about the blessings so we can go through them all together, but now places a blessing on a friendly target, reducing damage taken from all sources by 3%, whereas it used to just reduce the damage dealt from sources by up to a certain amount depending on what the rank was. And now it doesn't actually reflect damage, but it does increase strength and stamina by 10%, which is huge. The strength is huger than you think, but when we get further down in the talents, it will make sense. In addition, when the target blocks, parries, or dodges a melee attack, the target will gain 2% maximum displayed mana. Players can only have one blessing on at a time. So this is now an all-round tanking blessing. It gives you extra health, it gives you extra damage in the form of strength. It returns mana when you avoid attacks, and reduces your damage taken by 3%. What a huge blessing to have on your character. Reckoning hasn't changed at all. One-hand specialization has basically doubled in effectiveness, so it's now 10% for 3 points. Now moving down here is where it gets a bit juicy. So we have Spiritual Attunement, which you will be familiar with. You'll be familiar with Spiritual Attunement because it's in TBC. Now it's actually a talent that you have to put 2 points into. But it's because a lot of things in this tree have been stripped out or reduced the amount of points that you need to put in. So I think this was probably just tacked on, if I'm honest with you. So Ardent Defender, as you know, damage that takes you below 35% health is reduced by 20%. In addition, attacks which would otherwise kill you cause you to be healed by up to 30% of your max health amount healed based on defense. This healing effect cannot occur more than once every 2 minutes. So every 2 minutes, you get an extra life. Something that, again, makes Paladins extremely strong because they can take that killing blow and not die. It's pretty OP, really. And then we've got Redoubt, which we've already spoke about. So it does pretty much exactly the same thing, but for a lot less talent points, a lot further down. And it's basically amalgamating Redoubt and shield specialization into one. Combat expertise has been reduced to 3 points now instead of 5. You still get your expertise and your stamina from it though, but you also get some nice critical hit as well. Avenger Shield is still there, but now we get touched by the light. So it increases your spell power by an amount equal to 60% of your strength and increases the amount healed by your critical heals by 30%. So this is where I was talking about strength being important, because you're going to get a lot of spell power from it. And spell power, as you know, Consecrate causes a lot of threat. There's holy damage portions to Seal of Command, which we'll get to Seal of Command when we start looking at some of the ret tree, because obviously some of the ret tree is extremely useful for protection, and it's where you're going to spend your additional points. But 60% of your strength as spell power is absolutely huge. The critical heal bit is neither in or there, although you can help your healers, you know, if there's a phase where Saffron flies up in the air, or, you know, you just get that little bit of time, you can throw a couple of heals on yourself or on someone else, and they're actually going to be useful, which is good. Then we've got Guarded by the Light, which reduces spell damage taken by 6% and gives you a 100% chance to refresh the duration of Divine Plea when you hit an enemy. In addition, your Divine Plea spell is 100% less likely to be dispelled. So this is when we were talking about Divine Plea at the start with what it actually does, which, just for a refresher, you gain 25% of your total mana over 15 seconds, but the amount healed by your Flash of Light, Holy Light, and Holy Shock spells is reduced by 50%. So for 15 seconds you can keep it up, but now as long as you're hitting a target, you will always keep it up, gaining that 25% of your mana over 15 seconds constantly. Then we've got Shield of the Templar, which reduces damage taken by 3% and grants your Avenger's Shield a 100% chance to silence your targets for 3 seconds. Now, this is absolutely amazing for pulling in casters, you know, like casting enemies. It's an amazing talent, like really, really good. And getting the damage reduction from it as well, obviously you're going to take it. We get onto the big ones, and I say big ones because we still need to talk about Divine Sacrifice. Don't worry, I've not forgot about it. Judgments of the Just, it reduces the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice by 5 seconds. Increases the duration of your Seal of Justice effect by half a second, and your Judgment spells also reduce the melee attack speed of the target by 10%. You can put 2 points in this. Whilst it's useful, it's not really necessary in raids, because the attack speed reduction you're going to get from other sources. If you haven't got it in your raid, then it might be worth speccing 2 points into this, but it does mean you're going to lose something probably more beneficial along the way. So now, Hammer of the Righteous. Hammer the current target and up to 3 additional nearby enemies, causing 4 times your main hand damage per second as holy damage. It's absolutely huge. It can proc Seal of Command and Seal of Vengeance and anything else that you decide to use. This is glyphed. Ordinarily, it's only up to 2 additional targets, so it will hit 3 in total. But because I've actually got it glyphed, yeah, we hit 3 additional targets, so 4 in total. The AoE damage you do with this, combined with Consecrate and even Holy Wrath if they're undead targets, is huge. And like, spoiler alert, you are going to get Seal of Command, and using this with Seal of Command is just so satisfying. Now, going back to an actual raid cooldown or party cooldown. So Divine Sacrifice, 30% of all damage taken by party members within 30 yards is redirected to the Paladin, up to a maximum of 40% of the Paladin's health times the number of party members. Damage which reduces the Paladin below 20% health will break the effect. Now, having a cooldown like this is massive, and it really helps out, and you'll be using it, I'm not going to say on cooldown, but you'll be using it a lot, even in 5-man heroics and things like that. You know, when there's big AoE about to come in, and you can pop that, and yeah, okay, you're going to be taking damage, but you can take the damage. You know, you're a big, beefy prop Paladin. It's an amazing ability to have. And then when we put the extra 2 points in it, this is where, when we talked about Sacred Shield earlier being a minute long, when, according to mine, a minute long, when it's actually normally 30 seconds. But when Divine Sacrifice is active, your party and raid members within 30 yards take 20% reduced damage for 6 seconds. So now you can even give everybody in your party or raid more or less a 20% damage reduction personal cooldown, even though it's not a personal cooldown because you're doing it. But it's absolutely amazing, and you will use this at set times in raids, those times where big damage is about to come in at the raid or on a small group of players, maybe the melee, and you're gonna use it for a 20% damage reduction on, you know, possibly even on top of them using a potion, doing whatever else. So you want to be well organized with not just using this ability whenever you feel like it. Your raid leader should be really calling out when it's time to DS. But in addition, it increases the duration of your Sacred Shield by 100% and amount absorbed by 20%, which is huge. And you're going to want to keep Sacred Shield up all the time. You know, it lasts for a minute because you've got this talent, and it's 20% more effective. And let's face it, any absorb shields or any less damage that you can take as a prot paladin, the better. Now moving over into the ret tree, so again a few things have moved around. You'll notice that deflection, which gives you your 5% parry, has moved from tier 2 up into tier 1. Blessing of Might has moved down, but it only requires 2 points instead of 5. You know, there's some shifting around, but nothing worth worrying about too much. And we'll gloss over Seal of Command for now, because we'll get into that when we talk about the changes to seals and judgments and even hands and blessings. Which, in fact, to be completely honest, there's actually nothing in this particular video, as in a Protection Paladin video, really that's worth talking about in the ret tree, other than the fact that you will take Seal of Command. We don't really need to look at any of the other talents because they're all pretty much the same. Pursuit of Justice probably is worth mentioning, that you get a 50% duration of disarm effects reduced with 2 points, and you get 15% movement speed. Outside of that, nothing really worth going into great detail on. So that's the prot tree and a little bit of the ret tree. Well, one talent that we looked at. So let's talk about seals, hands, all the changes to sort of the core mechanics of how your prot paladin's going to play before we get onto glyphs, which is also going to have an impact on how you play. So seals now last 30 minutes and they're not consumed when you use judgment. So if we put Seal of Command on, you'll see it's on for 30 minutes, and we now have 3 different judgments that we can use. So Judgment of Light unleashes the energy of the seal to judge an enemy for 20 seconds, granting attacks made against a judged enemy a chance of healing attackers for 2% of their max health. We have exactly the same, but Judgment of Wisdom, so it gives a chance to get 2% mana, and then we have Judgment of Justice, which prevents them from fleeing and limits their movement speed. You also get an additional ability, if you like, when you unleash the seal on each of the different seals, as you do in TBC. So, for example, unleashing Seal of Command, it doesn't matter whether you use Wisdom, Judgment, or Justice, it will always do the same thing. So unleashing this seal's energy will judge an enemy, instantly causing 334 to 364 holy damage. So you'll notice if I put Judgment of Wisdom on, it will judge the enemy. We'll now be getting mana back when we attack, and you'll also notice that Seal of Command is hitting 2 targets now. So Seal of Command's rework basically is all melee attacks deal 174 to 231 additional holy damage, and when used with attacks or abilities that strike a single target, this additional holy damage will strike up to 2 additional targets. So just from auto attacking, the extra holy damage that Seal of Command is doing is hitting additional targets. If we then tie in Hammer of Righteous as well, so we're now expecting to hammer the current target and up to 3 additional nearby targets, causing 4 times main hand damage as holy damage. You'll notice when I use that, you'll notice that there was actually 2 lots of holy damage, because it's causing the Seal of Command damage and the Hammer of Righteous damage on that target. So you can see straight away, you know, if we're mixing in Consecrate at the same time, that the actual AoE damage that you can do is incredible. So Seal of Command is obviously your go-to AoE seal. And for single target, there's Seal of Vengeance or Seal of Corruption, depending on whether you're Horde or Alliance, but it's not like Seal of Blood and Seal of Vengeance, where there was a massive difference between the two. They're the same now, they've just got different names for both. And Seal of Vengeance acts pretty much as it ordinarily does. So when you put your Seal of Vengeance on and you auto-attack, you're going to start getting stacks of holy damage up to 5, which, when you unleash the Seal's energy, it will deal 468 holy damage to an enemy, increased by 10% for each application of Holy Vengeance on the target. So once it's stacked 5, if you wanted to Judgment of Light, you're going to get a nice big single target chunk of holy damage. So onto blessings and hands. So they're separated. So some of them are still there. Like Blessing of Protection is now Hand of Protection. Reason being, when you Blessing of Protection someone, it removes their normal blessing buff, and then you have to rebuff them afterwards. That's not the case anymore, because it's now Hand of Protection and doesn't mess up the blessing that they've already got on them. So there's 3 different hands that you can use. Sorry, 4 different hands that you can use. So you've got Hand of Freedom, which is basically Blessing of Freedom, but as I say, now when you Hand of Freedom yourself, it's not going to remove your beneficial blessing that you've got. You've got Hand of Protection, which again is Blessing of Protection, all exactly the same, but will not remove your blessing. I think you're getting it now. And then Blessing of Sacrifice and Blessing of Salvation are no longer blessings that you can cast. They're now hands. So Hand of Sacrifice is a 2-minute cooldown that transfers 30% of the damage on the person you casted it on back to you. And it will last 12 seconds or until the caster has transferred 100% of their maximum health. And players can only have 1 hand on them per paladin at any time. And then you've got Hand of Salvation, which places a hand on the party or raid member, reducing their total threat by 2% every 1 second for 10 seconds. So it reduces 20% of their threat over the full duration. Now, Hand of Salvation is a really interesting one. And I say it's a really interesting one because, as weird as it sounds, as a Protection Paladin, you can use it as a personal cooldown. Now, I know as a tank, you're like, well, you never want to reduce your threat. But if you glyph it, now as a Paladin, firstly, you shouldn't really have any threat problems, and you should use Hand of Salvation on yourself cautiously. If you are struggling on threat, you might not want to do what I'm about to say that you can do. But there is a glyph, and I always keep one in my bag for certain situations. Now, Glyph of Salvation. When you cast Hand of Salvation on yourself, it also reduces damage taken by 20%. So also, it doesn't replace the fact that it's going to reduce your threat, so you need to make sure that you've got a threat lead. But if there's a big attack about to come in, you can Hand of Salvation yourself for an extra personal cooldown, which is quite big. That's huge. But just know, it is on yourself. You can't use this on another tank as a cooldown. You know, you can only do it on yourself. But it's mega useful for certain phases of fights where they do huge damage, and you can then chain cooldowns back to back. You know, using this, using a trinket, DS, you know, whatever you need to do, or even Divine Protection. Should have mentioned Divine Protection, so we'll mention it now. So as you know, Divine Protection used to be in TBC, well, Vanilla and TBC, a worse version of Bubble, or it was the first iteration of Bubble you got, when in fact now Divine Protection actually reduces all damage taken by 50% for 12 seconds. Once protected, the target cannot be targeted by Divine Shield, Divine Protection, or Hand of Protection again for 2 minutes. Cannot be used within 30 seconds of using Avenging Wrath. But another really useful cooldown, so 50% damage reduction from your Divine Protection. You can potentially then get 20% damage reduction from your Hand of Salvation. You can see how you can chain these back to back during heavy damage phases of a fight and just be an absolute meat shield. It's amazing the amount of utility a Protection Paladin actually gets. Now, the auras haven't really changed too much. What's more changed is how they're affected by talents. So just going back to a talent that we did gloss over mainly because it wasn't relevant to talk about at the time, but if you improve Dev Aura, it's also going to increase the armor bonus of your Devotion Aura by 50%, but it increases the amount healed on any targets affected by any of your auras by 6%. So if you don't particularly need the armor, now the go-to Protection Paladin aura is going to be Dev Aura, but if you was to sacrifice Hammer of the Righteous to actually pick up what I use in a boosting spec, where I get Sanctified Retribution, which increases the damage caused by Ret Aura by 50%, and all damage caused by friendly targets affected by any of your auras is increased by 3%. You can actually pick up Improved Dev Aura to get the extra 6% healed, but you also would be improving Ret Aura, so it would increase the damage even more, which causes 112 holy damage to any enemy that strikes a target, and you're going to get the 3% additional damage. So I actually have two protection specs, where one with Hammer of Righteous for PvE and one without for PvE still, but for boosting. You know, if I'm running through low-level dungeons and stuff like that, you know, I'm going to have Ret Aura on because everything will pretty much just die as I'm running along. If you haven't seen this video up here about actually boosting or solo farming dungeons as a Paladin, check it out. It's only a 4 or 5 minute video, but it's actually probably really useful to know what you need to get ready now in TBC and what you can get in Wrath to make your prop Paladin absolute beast mode at boosting, seriously. Or, as I say, I personally use it as solo farming things like Strat, even the TBC dungeons, to be fair. So I feel like that's quite exhaustive so far. We've been through a lot. Talents, abilities, all the changes to the mechanics. I think this video is going to be quite long, which might be a good thing if you absolutely love Protection Paladins. But now let's talk about just Glyphs. This is where we'll pretty much finish it off, because anything else that you need to know will come in a Protection Paladin guide, where I'll talk about what gems, enchants, professions, all of that. Everything that you need to know in a guide format. This is not. This is more of an overview, but it's a very detailed overview. Or hopefully you're finding it a very detailed overview. So let's lastly just look at a few glyphs that you'll find really useful. So I'm only going to talk about the main glyphs, which we've already spoke about, the Glyph of Hand of Salvation, which will be useful. The main go-to glyphs are Glyph of Divine Plea, which while Divine Plea is active, you take 3% reduced damage from all sources. And now on the basis you're going to keep Divine Plea up as close to 100% at a time as possible, because you're constantly refreshing it when you're hitting a target. This glyph is 3% damage reduction, which getting that much damage reduction from one glyph slot is huge. Same applies when it comes to expertise. So Glyph of Seal of Vengeance, when you've got Seal of Vengeance or Seal of Corruption on for the Horde, it also grants 10 expertise while active. Now, you're only going to be bothered about expertise on single target fights, because on AoE, your Consecration, your Hammer of Righteous, all of that, that's all doing the threat. Whereas on single target, getting parried or dodging, your melee portion of the damage is going to be a threat loss that you're not going to want. So having Glyph of Seal of Vengeance for single target is an absolute must. And then another good one is Glyph of Righteous Defense, which increases the chance for your Righteous Defense and Hand of Reckoning abilities to work successfully by 8% on each target. Now, you never want to miss a taunt, so again, another pretty much mandatory glyph. If you're going back and doing lower levels of content and you're raid geared, so if you're raid geared and you're doing things like 5-man heroics still and you're having problems with mana, the Glyph of Seal of Command is actually very good just to get that mana back when you're judging. Because the vast majority of the time in heroics, even on single target, you're not going to bother switching. You'll just leave Seal of Command on because it's really not going to make that much difference because the fights are so short. Minor glyph, there's not really that many amazing ones. Glyph of Lay on Hands, reducing your Lay on Hands spell by 5 minutes is nice because Lay on Hands is a 20-minute cooldown in Wrath, so bringing it down to 15 is pretty cool. Glyph of Sense Undead is another one which is probably one of the only minor glyphs that's actually going to give you any damage increase at all. But damage against undead is increased by 1% while your Sense Undead ability is active. This ain't on all targets, it's only undead targets, but still 1% damage is 1% damage. And then probably the only one I'd use is Glyph of Blessing of Kings, which reduces the mana cost of your Blessing of Kings and Greater Blessing of Kings spell by 50%. It's not really mandatory, it's not really overly useful, but there's not really anything I think is that great to go in that last slot. But there are a couple of other minors that you could go with, like Glyph of Blessing of Might, which can increase the duration of Blessing of Might spell by 20 minutes when cast on yourself. That's more of a ret glyph than protection, definitely. You get exactly the same, but for Blessing of Wisdom, again, that'll be more of a holy. And I would honestly say that's about it. I could spend all day talking about a Protection Paladin because I genuinely am enjoying it. I'm loving it, in fact. It is a very, very cool class to tank anything on. 5-mans are fun, raids are fun. You'd love it. If you're a Protection Paladin in TBC, you've got a lot to look forward to in Wrath. So until next time, I'll see you on the next one. As I say, please do, if you enjoyed the video and you watched it from start to finish, please do drop a like. It helps more than you know. And consider subscribing to the channel. And I'll see you on the next one.